Je rappelle que vous pouvez vous exprimer.
So you may speak French, English, and Italian. You may listen to the interpretation in either of those three languages also. So English is, just look up at the booths and you'll have the numbers of the booths, English, French, and Italian interpretation.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, all, and thank you more than anything else for coming to this discussion panel on current forms of slavery. We in the S&D group attach great importance to this issue. We want to fight all forms of slavery. Now, this is the third time we're doing this, and I'm really delighted that for this third meeting, and I know many of you are aware of Africa Week, Senator Gianni Pittella is alongside me. We started Africa Week with him, actually, so it's a real pleasure for me to have him here today for this panel. The whole Africa Week initiative stems from him because he was president of the the S&D group. Dr. Sylvia Scapa is here today, and as I go through the topics, she will address them. Then Andy Ahmed, Senator Gianni Pittella will take the floor to introduce and speak on that subject, and Dr. Kari Muhammad is here also on the methods of combating modern forms of slavery. So that is, if you like, the structure. Now, not enough is being done, but I think I can say and should say that people who are working behind the scenes to advance things are the Secretariat. So Rosa is here alongside me. Thank you, Rosa. But may I also thank all of those who've worked hard behind the scenes of Africa Week. You see the MEPs, if you like, in the forefront, but we have a whole machinery working alongside us. And thank you for the real huge efforts you put into this issue. It's an important issue. Article 4 of the Universal Declaration. If I'm going too fast, by the way, do tell me. So if I'm speaking too fast, our interpreters can perhaps give me a sign. Was I going a bit fast there? No, apparently I wasn't. I wasn't speaking too fast. Good. Article 4 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights explicitly states that no one may be held in slavery or in servitude. Slavery and that sort of trafficking is banned in all forms. However, the 60th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights has passed, and even though we're 60 years on in this regard, combating slavery has not yet come to an end. Indeed, it needs to be stepped up. And today, indeed, we're talking about new forms of slavery. Back in 1966, the UN adopted a pact against slavery. It was followed by other non-binding acts with the aim of condemning countries that failed to comply with this resolution, and that includes, of course, the abolition of the death penalty. Now, I don't wish to go into detail. Our experts are here to do just that. Slavery is often found in isolated areas, so access can be an issue. Sometimes workers are involved in illegal activities, but they can be geographically isolated. Sometimes they work in areas subject to violence or political instability. You see, I'm trying to paint the background of this subject, mobility. Today there's a lot of migration. Often we have the impression that people, when they move, they leave their rights behind them. I like to use to also discuss the whole question of the portability of rights, directly linked to the exploitation of human beings. If we remember that rights, if you like, are left at home, you know, when people move, that can be very dangerous. So we've got to focus on the portability of rights. Anyone who moves cannot be regarded as goods. But people, more and more, this is what we're seeing. People are regarded as goods or products, if you like. So I think we've got to promote and protect everyone's rights, and in particular those of people who are most vulnerable, and especially in areas where rights are denied to persons. So I've said enough, and I would like now to turn to our guests, Dr. Silvia Scarpa. She is assistant professor at the John Cabot University of Rome, dealing with issues of modern slavery, human rights, international organizations, migration. She works as an adjunct professor on universal law in the Department of Jurisprudence in Luis Guido Cardo in Rome, and she's also given a course on migration and multiculturalism at the American University of Rome. She worked as a postdoctoral researcher in international human rights law, and that was at the School of Sant'Anna in Pisa. So the professor has a long and distinguished CV, if you like, and I would now like to give her the floor to speak on modern forms of slavery. Thank you very much, Cecile, and thank you for the invitation. If it's okay, I will speak in English.
Honorable Chair, Madam Kyenge, distinguished members of the European Parliament, and ladies and gentlemen, let me first of all thank the group of Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament for the kind invitation to join you today and to deliver this presentation on the issue of modern slavery in Europe and in Africa. I am honored and grateful for this opportunity and for the chance to discuss with you about the recent conclusions and recommendations that I identified in my briefing on contemporary forms of slavery, drafted upon the request of the Subcommittee on Human Rights of the European Parliament. I identified various problems, and I will try to merge a few of these conclusions on the most important issues for the purpose of understanding what can be done. The first issue that I identified is connected with the use of terms. As I said, the briefing was on contemporary forms of slavery. But as you know, there are a variety of issues arising within this area, as including the issue of human trafficking, issues connected with forced labor, child labor, as well as other forms of exploitation, such as the worst forms of child labor. So various legal categories that are used side by side together actually with so-called sociological concepts. Also the concept of contemporary forms of slavery or modern slavery, as we label them, is a sociological concept. And the first question that I was asking to myself is whether this is only a matter of semantics. Is it only a matter of the words that we use to label certain practices, or do we have problems whenever we are labeling certain practices in a different way? What I discovered, and this is part of the work that I have been doing in more than a decade, actually, because my first activities were connected with human trafficking, and 10 years ago I published my first monograph on the issue of human trafficking with an intention to propose that the trafficking framework should have been broadly used, because as it is, it might cover many of these exploitative practices. What I discovered in the last 10 years is that states, unfortunately, didn't follow that recommendation. and instead are using the trafficking framework in a very selective way, only for including certain forms of exploitation in contested ways as well. Because as we know, whenever then human trafficking falls within the issue of international migration, and in particular within the issue of irregular migration, then we have serious issues arising in terms of guaranteeing the protection of people. First of all, the identification, and then obviously the subsequent protection of individuals falling into that category. So when I was asked about drafting a briefing on contemporary forms of slavery, the first question was, which practices do fit the category of contemporary forms of slavery? And so I examined what actors within the system of global governance are doing. And if you look at that, and if you include all these different actors, as including states, international governmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, other entities that are also working at the international level, as including informal groups and networks, the OLC, media agencies, the epistemic community, so scholars, what you discover is that they are not in agreement. Each one of them has its own specific list of practices that they deal with. Each one of them has its own priorities, and not always they are matching each other, which creates problems, I believe, in particular in three areas. First of all, the issue actually connected with coordinated action. So what we are lacking is coordinated action at the global level, also because of that, because of different terminologies being used, and the different terminologies are not only a matter of semantics. They mean different priorities, or also the fact that some actors are not willing to act in certain areas. The second problem is connected with collecting relevant data and calculating meaningful estimates. And this is also a problem, I mean, not only in terms of understanding the prevalence of the issue, but also understanding exactly where these issues are existing and how actually then we can act for fighting against that at a global level. And also in this case, we're going to discuss about that a little bit more in detail. We see that some of these efforts are also politicized, which is problematic. Whenever we try to calculate data or estimates, but then we associate that issue with a ranking of states, you know, within the international arena. And in these rankings, it always happens that, you know, the Western states are the best ones, and other states, usually developing countries, African countries, Asian nations, and others, are at the bottom of these rankings. Then we also have a problem in a way, because it is true that many actors, many states all over the world are adopting new laws, are attempting to do something. And in many cases, those rankings also do not take into consideration how Western states, as I said, maybe they might be doing a lot in certain areas, but whenever actually efforts are getting into issues of security, irregular migration, so the priorities also on their agendas, then all these efforts actually are in many cases spoiled. Second issue that I would like to emphasize today, issues arising in terms of the legal standards. In the briefing, I was proposing the drafting of a new treaty, and I was fiercely attacked by the representative of the European Commission for that. I have been studying international law for many years, so I know that drafting a new treaty might be a burdensome exercise, might take time, efforts, and energy. So I was not doing that for the purpose of only introducing a new fancy document which might not have any formal or specific then relevance. But if you look at that, definitely I think that this will be important, because the frameworks that we have in place today, the ones connected with slavery, which is very old and outdated, with conventions dating back 1926 and 1956, the framework connected with human trafficking, which was implemented, as I said, within the area of transnational organized crime, because the protocol, the Palermo Protocol, was annexed to a convention against transnational organized crime, and the one on forced labor, which is limited because of the fact that it deals with issues of forced labor, then are, according to me, are not sufficient for fighting against all these different issues. What is the international community doing? And I get very quickly to my conclusions. The recent steps are not actually, according to me, positive. The Sustainable Development Goals include actually 3 goals and targets specifically dedicated to some contemporary forms of slavery. But if you look at that, they are unconnected in a way to each other, and the action done so far is not positive in the end. It's very promising that actually one of the targets it's dedicated to the elimination of child labor by 2015, which is even 5 years before the other deadlines for the Sustainable Development Goals. But a preliminary examination by the ILO somehow demonstrates that probably we're not going to be able to meet that deadline. So if you look at that, we need more action for the purpose of dealing with all these different exploitative practices in a coordinated way and for the purpose of meeting all these deadlines. The Global Compact on Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, also over there, again, there are a variety of references to some forms of exploitation. Some are missing, for instance, such as the issue of early and forced marriages that I found as a specific loophole within the document. The ones that are included, the issue of human trafficking, again, within the area of irregular migration, so there is a specific focus and reference, obviously, to the Palermo Protocol. And then for what concerns the issue of slavery, servitude, forced and compulsory labor and child labor, they are only perceived in terms of labor exploitation, which is a limited framework as well. So also in this respect, we have fundamental problems. And I get to my conclusions. What can be done? This is the thorny question. I've been teaching in the last decade a course on contemporary slavery and human trafficking in Rome at John Cabot University. And I'm grateful actually to the dean of that university for the chance actually to introduce that course, which was a novelty 10 years ago. Not so many universities had courses in that specific area. And the course generated a tremendous interest. My classes are full every semester. So there is an interest in young people in knowing more, but also in knowing how we can really eliminate those contemporary forms of slavery. The first issue is probably having a coherent and comprehensive approach and filling the loopholes. As I said, we have spot actions in different sectors, but nothing that somehow looks at the area in a coherent way, creating a framework in which all these different practices can be fought, notwithstanding the differences, because that's the issue as well. We're putting together issues that are fundamentally different. Human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation, together with human trafficking for the removal of organs. They are fundamentally different. And the issue of early and forced marriages, again, so child labor, for instance, in agriculture and other practices, slavery by descent, so chattel slavery that still exists in some African nations. All these issues are fundamentally different. But still, I think that we need a general framework for dealing with all of them all together. Otherwise, probably we're going to see some limited results in some of these areas, depending on the priorities and the power of the actors that are proposing those priorities. But we're never going to see that the framework as it is will proceed from an international perspective. We also need to acknowledge certain structural factors that are determining these issues and determining the vulnerability of people. I push very much also when I discuss about these issues with my students on the issues of gender inequality, on the need of an intersectional approach, how ethnic differences, how disabilities, how other, in a way, differences might, in a way or another, determine a vulnerability for individuals. And in certain cases, these are structural issues. So if you want to really eliminate certain forms of exploitation from society, then we need to tackle those issues. And this leads me to another issue, which is actually mainstreaming the issue of contemporary forms of slavery into other frameworks. This summer, I was attending a conference in Rome of the Academic Council of the United Nations, and I saw how, for instance, FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, now is starting actually to deal with some issues connected with child labor and forced labor in agriculture. So we really need also multiple actors from multiple perspectives. Climate change, again, climate change can determine certain forms of exploitation whenever people are moved and they have nothing with themselves, so they're vulnerable whenever they're going to go. Environmental action. Some of the slaves are destroying the environment. and they are obliged to do so, because they are forced to do the activities that they do. So this is also important in a way. A bottom-up approach, so how do we solve these issues? Participation, talking to the people who are also in these situations, because again, proposing, as I said before, frameworks with a top-down approach, probably it's not going to solve many of these issues. And then finally, the role of awareness raising, sensitization, and I would rather add education at all levels. Individuals are to be aware. Many of my students are interested in this issue, and as soon as they attend the course, the first thing that they say, slavery doesn't exist. Or if it is existing, it exists somewhere else in the world, not in the US, not in Italy, not in Europe. You know, it's not something that we see openly, because probably we do not have the mindset for seeing it, but actually it is everywhere. And the more we study it, the more we have investigative reporting on this, we discover that really it is everywhere. So I would like actually to conclude by quoting William Wilberforce, the British Member of Parliament who actually led the anti-slavery movement in the UK. And what he said once, I think it's striking, because he said, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again that you didn't know. So once that you are aware, then again, it's up to you to decide to just turn yourself to the other side. But probably, you know, and I saw that in many of my students, many of them then whenever they know, they also decide to be active participants in this global network that can do something actually to eradicate contemporary forms of slavery. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Thank you very much for your comments. I don't think that we could say that we didn't know about it, and we certainly cannot look the other way. I would like to move on now to the other speakers so that we can find out more about these new forms of slavery, forced labor, child labor, human trafficking. And there are people also who are in servitude or in slavery because they have a debt that they owe. There is forced marriage as well, sexual exploitation. These are all part and parcel of the new forms of slavery. And if we do not have the right instruments, then we run the risk of not actually seeing that there is this slavery round the corner from all of us. It's there everywhere. So I will give the floor straight away to Hamdi Ahmed. He is part of the Initiative for the Resurgence of the Abolitionist Movement. He represents IRA, that is the Initiative for the Resurgence of the Abolitionist Movement in Mauritania. It is a group that was set up in 2008. It is a public struggle or a popular struggle movement, and it has also been involved in strikes, hunger strikes, marches in a number of cities around Mauritania. They also deal with the issue, cultural issues such as the religious aspects of slavitude. IRA was set up in Mauritania in 2008, and a number of people have been dealt with because of their belonging to this. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Hamdi Ahmed to ask him to explain more about this to us. Floor is yours, sir. And you've got 8 minutes. Thank you very much. Mr. Bullman and members of the Drug Committee and people from Africa, Asia and Oceania, members of the S&D group, and Ms. Cécile Kiange, EP Vice Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, a few months ago, inspired by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you addressed a kind invitation to me and my companion to come here to this very important event, that is Africa Week. And it was a very relevant choice, so that you chose those who lead the IRA in Mauritania because of the interest that the members of the European Parliament have in the persistence of slavery throughout the world, and in particular in my country, Mauritania. Now, unfortunately, there is slavery and racism against those Mauritanians who are of African descent. And Mr. Biran was unable to come to this meeting and unable to campaign in Mauritania for the post in the parliament that he was standing for. And arbitrary imprisonment for for activism and peaceful political activism during this year has meant that my companion, my comrade, cannot be with me here at this meeting, nor has he been able to campaign in the legislative elections in Mauritania. But he does recognize the honor to him of your invitation, and because he is in prison, because of the situation that he faces and that others do as well. However, in all of this, he knows that he has the support of the Mauritanian people and the solidarity of you, members of the European Parliament, represented here in Brussels. And I am representing him here. And I would like to tell you that most people in Mauritania are against the laws, the institutionalized slavery that we see in Mauritania and the apartheid. The credible international organizations, independent international organizations, support our struggle. Human Rights Watch, for example, Amnesty International, Anti-Slavery International, and others. That's just to quote a few of them. And in their reports, they do bear witness to what I say as well. And I would ask you, members of this House, to read the reports of the UN special rapporteurs dealing with human rights and what they say about the infringement of such rights in Mauritania. The current government has restricted the independence of judges and the powers of the judiciary, certainly when it comes to the oppressed communities of our country. This is a pseudo-democratic regime. There is torture used as a means for people who are fighting against injustice and oppression, and the different reports from that international NGOs and the UN talk about the actions of the police against people who are fighting against slavery, and also immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa into Mauritania. And there is gratuitous police violence, selectively used, disproportionately used against peaceful demonstrators, in particular those who are abolitionists. And I wanted to show you some photographs and videos proving what has been happening. Mr. Mohamed Mehega is the head of the police, and on the 28th and 29th of October, there were actions by the police against Mauritanian people. There are people who've been in power in Mauritania since 2005, and others who've been in power less time than that, but these are seen as the principal architects of torture. People are detained, those who are activists for rights in Mauritania. Now, our NGO in Mauritania has been banned from the word go in our country. We want to base ourselves on the freedom and justices of free countries around the world, for men and for women who are fighting against the most atrocious forms, the trafficking of black people in Africa, the violence against the black population of the country, which in some of its aspects is reminiscent of apartheid in South Africa. And there are others who are setting up versions of ERA, the Initiative for the Resurgence of Abolition, to fight against slavery, as we are trying to do in Mauritania. And so I would pay homage, and we all do as well, to those countries such as France, who have done what they can, Germany, Spain, Italy, the Netherlands as well. And I would like to honour others as well who have done what they can. In Belgium, for example, in their NGO, they have worked very actively and very closely with us and spoken to the Belgian authorities and the European authorities as well, and given us very effective and indispensable support. So the support of your parliamentary group here in the European Parliament, what you can do as MEPs, what you can do in your countries and here in the EU, is absolutely essential to help us to free our colleagues and to eradicate slavery. That is something that we are fighting for, the end to the oppression of people of African descent in Mauritania. And I am here in the name of my colleague during African Week, and my name is Hamdi Ahmed. Thank you very much indeed.
Merci beaucoup pour votre...
Thank you very much for bearing witness. That was exactly 8 minutes, so if you do have any videos or photos that you want to show, perhaps we can do that at the end and we can carry on with our discussion. And we will hear from our other speakers before we see anything else. And I would also like to say that it is also very important to tackle the cultural side. I know that there is a UN resolution about Mauritania on the issue of slavery, and I would also like to know more about that particular roadmap, but perhaps that can be part and parcel of our discussion afterwards. Let me carry on now. Our next speaker is Senator Gianni Pittella, who is the former president of the S&D group here in the European Parliament. And since, and I'm going to go back into the Italian language. I was responding to the previous speaker in French. No, Gianni Pittella, the senator, has been involved since '66 in politics. And we are going to hear now from Gianni Pittella. He, as I said, was the president of the S&D group, and he has done so much over such a long time. It's very difficult to say everything that he's done, and I'm sure I'll forget an awful lot, but he really is our pillar of policies here in this group. And as I said at the beginning, I'm delighted because through him and his sensitivities, we were able to bring Africa here into the European Parliament, into the S&D group. And through him, we got the Africa Week up and running. He now plays an important role in the Italian Senate, where he carries on fighting our fights, and it's a very important voice because it's a direct link from the European Parliament to the Italian country. But he was happy to come back to us for Africa Week. So Gianni, thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much, and good morning everybody. Cécile Kyenge is a real combatant, and I would like to thank her for the very kind words she said about me here, but I can tell you about years and years of common commitment, and I can tell you about her farsightedness, her tenacity, which should be an example for every one of us. And it is a pleasure for me to be here with other members of the European Parliament, both Italian and non-Italian. I see a number of you here. The S&D group, and I am very proud of this, was the group under my presidency to begin this, and it carried on under the presidency of our colleague Udo Bullmann, and we have been fighting a political battle that is without end, really. Soraya is here as well now, and this is a struggle that isn't just to do with Africa Week. It is something about Africa as a political priority. I would like to thank so many people. The list is an enormously long one. Simone, Daniele, Rose, Joshua, so many others who have been working over the past few years behind us and alongside us, indeed, to ensure that we can wage this wonderful political battle. And it really makes us unique in the European Parliament, possibly unique in all national parliaments in Europe, actually. I think this is something that we should really be stressed. And I remember very clearly elements that we've tackled on slavery. First of all, I've been with Cecile, Daniele and others to the DRC, and I remember that very clearly. We visited a clinic, actually one run by the current UN Nobel Peace Prize, Dennis Quinger, who's a doctor, and he saved the life of thousands and thousands of young girls who've been raped, because in the DRC we see the most dangerous mafias, if you like, anywhere. They kill husbands, they rape the wives, and they force the children and the girls to work in mines where they get cobalt, which is used in all these mobile phones we have. These mobile phones are covered in blood. The second flashback I have, the second memory I have, is the collapse in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, of an industry where there were thousands of people in the textile circles. 1,209 people killed. I remember that as a flashback as well. And the third of these is Italy, Foggia, that province in the south of Italy where I'm from. And there were 12 people coming from Africa who died, and it happens every single day. People who are there, exploited, underpaid. And given these situations, I think that we've seen lots of examples. We've heard about some already. We'll hear about other ones. But I think that we really do have to raise our voices about this. There are things that we have done in the European Parliament, and I can talk to you and look you straight in the eye about this, because we have voted on the enforced traceability of materials from these mines, and that was a huge battle that we waged with a majority in the Parliament. Nobody thought we were going to do it, but we did. And it is now mandatory to have traceability for those materials that are used in so many things, such as our mobile. And another great battle we fought here in the European Parliament was the traceability in the textiles chain. And the third, which we have to carry on, which is fair trade. So the fair trade is one of these slogans, for example, but there are other initiatives along the same lines as well. And we do have to carry on raising awareness in public opinion, locally, regionally, nationally, globally indeed. Because it is through raising awareness in the public opinion we can do something about all of these conditions of slavery. We can reveal them and we can tackle them. And then again there is the social responsibility, corporate social responsibility. That is something that we really do need to support. We have to talk about those companies that do follow CSR, so that it isn't only that they are guaranteeing internally the rights of their own workers, but they guarantee things externally as well. Now, in Italy, the situation is a very serious one indeed, from this point of view as well. In Foggia as well, I can tell you about a law drafted by my party, the Democratic Party, introducing very serious sentences indeed for those who exploit people. And there is an anti-trafficking fund that is established under this. There is provision for the compensation for victims of these incidents of slavery, and then there is certification for farms and agricultural holdings that respect the rules. But we need to do an awful lot more than that, and I am two main points I want to make before I conclude. One is a very, very current topic as well in Italy, and possibly not only in Italy. There is this issue of immigration. If we do not properly manage the migratory flows, the migration flows, then what we are doing is opening the door to the mafia. They are going to control and manage these people. Because the mobility of people is an inviolable truth, and it is something that you cannot take away from people. It is inalienable, especially when there is famine, when there are wars. People are going to move. You know, Salvini tries to stop this with slogans. He says, let's shut our doors. But you can't do that. You can't stop this through law either. There was a law that was adopted in the Senate yesterday, the so-called security decree, which actually leads to more irregular migration because it reduces the possibility of integration as well. And the more you stop legal immigration, the more you stop legal migrants coming in, the more irregularity, illegality and mafia and slavery you create. And this is something that we have to say loud and clear to the Italian people, but to people around the world as well. And the second and last point I want to make is that slavery is one of the facets of the unfair phenomenon that is globalization. Globalization is not something that you can stop. You can't say, I want to get off the globalization train. The globalization train doesn't stop, but we do have to manage it. We do have to control it, and that hasn't happened. We have not been able to govern globalization, if you like, and that has led to new injustices and new forms of slavery. And I think that reparation is something that we have to be able to do, and we can do that through the socialist movement. Reparation for the awful sides of globalization. Socialism isn't the awful thing that we have seen in previous decades and centuries, nor is socialism the hot water that we try to clean the face of fascism with. Socialism is a great culture, a great philosophy. It is a science of thinking that wants to change things, beginning with injustices and doing that throughout the world. Thank you very much indeed.
Grazie.
Thank you so much, Gianni. Thank you very much indeed for everything that you have expressed, and that is certainly going to be part and parcel of our conversation later. I welcome Soraya Post. She will be making the conclusions, giving the conclusions at the end of this panel discussion. And I would also like to thank absolutely everybody who has been working behind the scenes here, the Secretariat who have been working on the projects of Africa Week, but I also see that we have people here in the room, Joshua, Francesco, Jean, Sultan, all sorts of people here, and I'd like to, on behalf of this panel, thank all of them for their work. We've got Ferrandino and Zana here as well, and thank you for being here. And there will be other members of the Parliament coming to join us as well. Now, the next point, because having heard from Gianni Pittella and some very important points that he has made, I wanted to talk about inequality as well, which is at the very foundation of so many issues. If we do not tackle inequality, then we are going to find ourselves faced with very serious issues which will simply spread as a common denominator. And one of the topics which I am sure will be covered by our next speaker as well. And we have got to link this fight against slavery to citizenship. And I think that this was something mentioned by our first speaker as well. When you find people who have no rights at all, they become objects. And it is very easy then to turn them into goods. So we have Dr. Kiari Mohammed, Vice-Chancellor of Modibo Adama University of Technology in Nigeria. We met when I went to Nigeria. I went to your university. The professor is one of the leading experts on the fight against terrorism and insurrection, and in particular Boko Haram. And he has worked on peace and the reconciliation and rehabilitation after the war, and he has a very, very impressive curriculum. But I would just like to point out that he's a member of the Historical Society of Nigeria, the Society for Peace Study and also a member of Chatham House in London. And he has worked for the EU, UNICEF, the World Bank, and also the French Institute for Research in Africa. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to be here again. Let me start my intervention with the fact that, let me start from where Sylvia left. William Wilberforce, the abolition movement of the 19th century, led to the stoppage of the transatlantic slave trade officially. But of course, it was assumed that with the end of the 19th century slavery was gone for good. Unfortunately, slavery reinvented itself and came back in new forms, and of course, under the public radar. So modern slavery is not about people owning other people. It is basically a form of slavery that is thriving on other people, exploiting other people, without necessarily calling it the name of slavery. Whether you call it modern slavery or contemporary slavery, the bottom is that there's coercion, there's exploitation, there's control without the consent of the individual who is being controlled. So the key words are coercion, exploitation, control, and lack of consent. Now, modern form of slavery, like Sylvia again said, includes forced slavery, debt bondage or bonded labor, human trafficking, child slavery, inherited or descent-based slavery, early marriage. These are all forms of slavery. We're not sure we know what the causes of slavery are, but definitely they are also multifaceted. But slavery seems to thrive on the powerlessness of some people, on the grinding poverty to which they are exposed, and several other issues, again, which Sylvia refers to as structural vulnerabilities that naturally predisposes some people towards slavery. Customs and tradition, particularly in several parts of Africa. These outdated customs ensures that some groups, classes, or castes are born into and remain in slavery in spite of the UN Declaration of Human Rights and all of the international frameworks, some of which have been domesticated by the member countries. So since most of these issues, particularly international frameworks and what needs to be done, had been effectively handled, going forward, what should we do? Modern slavery, by whatever name or form, has no place in the modern world and must end. But of course, this will require the concerted efforts of all stakeholders in all parts of the world, in Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, South America, and the EU. As a first step, all customs, traditions, and belief systems that practice slavery must be legislated against, and of course, the law needs to be enforced. In some of these countries, the laws against slavery do exist. However, the institutions are so fragile and ineffective that they cannot be enforced. So particularly the capacity of states to monitor and enforce ban should be enhanced. The EU should dismantle cartels of criminals that thrive on the import of slaves from poor countries. Because in Europe, traffickers and those who hold traffic slaves should be identified and punished to serve as a deterrence, to others. Meanwhile, victims of slavery should be rehabilitated to pick up the pieces of their lives, either back home in their countries or in the new lands in their new abodes. Another viable mechanism for ending slavery is community sensitization, or what Sylvia calls education awareness, on the inherent dangers of slavery practices wherever it exists. Those customs that sanction slavery or processes that involve oath-taking and such other practices that tie victims to perpetrators should be undone. The support of local chiefs and community leaders in breaking these shackles should be explored. So we shouldn't leave it only to national governments, or to regional governments, but we should go down, to the local level to ensure that local chiefs, who have influence but not political authority, are involved. The EU and its partners should avoid all forms of military adventurism in foreign countries that are capable of destabilizing such countries and making them a safe haven for criminal gangs and outlaws. The failure of governance in Libya, for example, is not unconnected with events that led to the ouster of Gaddafi in 2011. Diplomatic and non-military options for dealing with situations should be explored. Libya has now become a problem both for Europe and for Africa. Other conflict spots on the continent that are capable of generating conflicts, refugees, and internal displacement should be addressed as a matter of priority. There are ongoing conflicts with several degrees of instability in Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Uganda, Nigeria, Mauritania, DRC, Central African Republic, name them. A meaningful partnership should be established to assist countries that provide the pool of modern slaves to become livable for those aspiring to migrate and settle in Europe. Conditions in those countries should improve through investments in health, education, and other social services. Of course, the EU has a vital role to play in such initiatives. Countries that supply slaves and recipient countries should cooperate to end this despicable, inhuman practice. So I think with this, and of course aware of the fact that I've taken a lot of notes from Sylvia, having said that we should mainstream contemporary slavery into other contemporary forms and international frameworks. I'll thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. Adesso
So let us move ahead with our program. Mrs. Yes, Madam, the President of the Association of Women Heads of Households in Mauritania. Mokhtar is someone who I won't present. She has a long CV, but she's well known in Mauritania and outside Mauritania. You've been a humanitarian and humanist activist in a society where the situation of women is synonymous with silence and taboos. And since you were even at school, you've been a great activist, a real fighter. I took a very close look at your curriculum vitae, and I have seen that you don't tremble before anyone. You're here, you're a real activist, and it's great to have you here today. We're delighted to hear your intervention. After you've spoken, I will open the debate, but I will only allow 3 speakers for the debate, because at 12:10 I will have to hand over to Soraya, my colleague, who will draw some conclusions from the debate. So, Madam President, we need your witness now and your testimony, and we'll also hear what you have to say about the seminar. Go ahead, please. Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak on a situation that really goes to my heart, slavery in Mauritania, but also slavery. Well, I am a human rights activist and an anti-slavery activist in my country. Slavery is an inhumane and degrading practice that we find in Mauritania. It's a reality. A number of mechanisms I know have been set up. There is a law under which slavery is a crime against humanity. It has sanctioned, if you like, the combating various courts have been set up. There have been some, if you like, theatrical court cases against people who were responsible for safety, but real exploiters, but more theatre than anything else. Slavery is linked to racism in my country. It's a multicultural country, 4 or even 5 communities, one could say, cohabiting, living together in a disastrous, catastrophic situation. Slavery is cross-cutting, it's across the board. But it is visible in the Arabo-Berber community, and it's perhaps worst of all in that community. But to different degrees. In some communities, slavery has disappeared. In others, it is still there, but it is really and very much there in the Arabo-Berber community. In spite of all of the mechanisms that have been set up, there is an official denial, especially in the mouth of the President of the Republic. And of course, he should be an example. We have a president, after all, who makes all the decisions. There's a lack of access to justice for descendants of slaves. There's exclusion, maltreatment, physical, psychological, mistreatment, and neglect. So it runs right through the heart of life in our country. Now, I want to introduce the concept of jar, and man can flee slavery, but women cannot. They're linked to their children. So this is all about gender. And clearly, women are in a worse position than men. The children of slave women often are born outside marriage because of rape, etc. So these issues are genuinely serious. If we consider today those who are fighting slavery, who are they? Well, women remain with the children and they can therefore give the testimony, and it's women who are ready and willing to flee the awful condition that they have been born into of inhumane exploitation. So, yes, women and children, I suppose you could say, today are still in the grip of slavery. They are the victims of slave masters. Now, anti-slavery activists have fought hard against slavery, and they have brought about improvements in the situation. Biram Bakarolmes and other activists. So I would like to salute them and perhaps send out here a plea to the European Parliament. A plea for action in order to liberate Bura. Because Biram is, a political, if you like, or an opinion prisoner. He hasn't committed any crime, but is nonetheless kept in detention because of opinions and the work done to combat this degrading situation. It's not only Biram, the number of others who have distinguished themselves in fighting slavery, and there are also Mohammed Shalom Haram, who wrote an article and was therefore imprisoned. But even since he was freed, he is kept under very tight rein. So unfortunately, human rights activists are exposed to repression. I would say that Nouakchott, in Nouakchott, where the black community lives, or in particular in the outskirts, every evening at about 7 o'clock, there's a police raid to fight and indeed torture the young people of this community. And normally these are descendants of Negro African slaves. So there is rampant, rife discrimination. People simply are not real citizens in their own country. They've no access to social security, health, education, because they are not regarded as citizens. And ways of earning income are very few. Most of what is produced in Mauritania goes abroad, but so that is all I would like to say. Thank you.
Merci. Merci beaucoup, madame, pour votre...
Thank you very much, madam. We continue our Africa Week. We will be showing a film, and that will be followed by a debate on climate change and food security. This will take place in ASP 363. So it's just beside here. So just so that you don't all leave the Parliament after this meeting, you should know that the film will be shown just beside here. There's also a sandwich lunch which will be served in that room, so do come along please afterwards. It'll be in the ASP 363. So that's following this debate, this seminar, immediately following. Apparently it's not 363, it's 3G3. So even with my glasses I didn't read that properly. 3G3. I'd better take my glasses off. Thank you, Rose, for correcting me there. So let's now open the floor. I will allow 2 speakers, and after that I will hand over to Soraya. So just 2 speakers, please, but then Soraya will wind up the seminar. A man and a woman. I'm a real champion of equality. Madam, you'll start, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Anita Nkirote from Kenya, and my question is in regard to human rights violation in regards to human trafficking, and I'll give a case of example of the connection between DRC Congo and Kenya. So with economic crimes perpetuated in DRC Congo in the mining areas, women are violated, their husbands are killed, and the result is Kenya receives a lot of refugees who go to Kakuma refugee camp. And if around 5 years ago, the government of Kenya wanted to close Kakuma refugee camp, and it became there was international intervention from the UN. But my question is, these refugee camps continue staying there for long, and I feel like the women and children are denied access to SDGs 1 to 4. That's they experience poverty, hunger, lack of education, and inequality. Is there really sustainable lives in these refugee camps, and what are we really doing to stop this, and how can the SND group intervene in such situations? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Now my second speaker, I'm not sure. Oh, what will I do now?
Much for the presentations. My name is Nelson Ajala, and I have 2 questions quickly. The first question is that in Africa, for example, as Professor Mohamed rightly pointed out, that there are customs and traditions that actually prevent people from, getting away from slavery. And my question is, since we know that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, and that human right slavery is a human right issue, what do we do about the known structures that actually allow this to happen? For example, with customs and traditions, you have the Trokosa systems, places to practice in this. We have shrines, and we have, in Ghana, for example, you have the Nogopo, you have the Gambaga witch camp, and all these places that actually promote different kinds of slavery. So what do we do about these structures, these known structures by everyone? You talk to anybody and they're, here this kind of thing is practiced, there is practiced. What do we do about these structures? Second question, which was actually voiced by my brother here, he wants to know, and I also want to know, what Africans or like regional bodies themselves are doing in contribution to this. For example, the AU, the regional, for ECOWAS, how are they participating in this fight against slavery and its practice? Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Merci beaucoup. Moi, je passerai.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the speakers a chance now to answer. We don't have much time. If we have time, we can show a brief video, but I'd prefer, firstly, to hear answers to those questions.
Une minute.
So 1 minute, please, per person.
Much, Honorable King. For the first question, international refugee law, and actually the fact that it's a little bit underdeveloped, still relies a lot on the Geneva Convention, and then again it's up then to the states to decide to ratify. There are only a few principles that are part of peremptory norms of international law or customary law. In this respect, I would rather say that again it should be the Kenyan authorities, first of all, so I go back to states again, and this is probably also the issue, that states should be at the forefront of this battle, also whenever these practices are intertwining in a way with refugee status also of individuals. And this is problematic. I did a study for the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs recently assessing, for instance, the Italian fight against human trafficking. And this is one of the things in which in Italy we have been working a lot recently. So notwithstanding the fact that we have had issues in terms of human trafficking for at least 2 decades now we're doing a little bit more to see exactly what to do when human trafficking victims or other victims of contemporary forms of slavery are also asylum seekers or are refugees, and how the two systems in a way can be combined. For what concerns the second question, these issues in terms of customs and traditions, religious forms of slavery such as the Trocosi system and other systems, also chattel slavery in Mauritania, it's true that many of these practices are connected with cultures and traditions in many places, and probably that's also why it's difficult to change. I think that in this respect, there is a general discussion in terms of human rights and which one prevails between human rights and cultural values or traditions. Whenever there is a serious issue arising in terms of human rights, I believe that we have to be committed to say that human rights prevail. So in all these cases in which actually the practices, the traditions are generating contemporary forms of slavery, then we should be clear in saying that we need to change these practices. How do we do that? I think that involving the local leaders, the priests, the religious leaders, community leaders probably can be the first step, because if they are the ones in a way or another being involved in these practices, then if they are within with us in the battle against these practices, then they can help and support their own communities in fighting against that. What are regional organizations doing? In particular for ECOWAS, it comes clearly to my mind a recent case of the ECOWAS Court of Justice in respect of Niger, the Adige 2 money case that many of you, I am sure you know it, which was, I think, a watershed case. So I think that there is a role also for international regional organizations to play, as it is also for the European Union on our side of the issue, in terms of pushing for fighting against contemporary forms of slavery. Many of you maybe know about the Adige 2 money case. It was a case of chattel slavery, so a lady who received a certificate of liberation. So somehow she was in slavery, it was recognized by the master that she had been liberated, which is already for us, a bit strange to imagine someone who received a certificate of freedom in a way. If we are born free, how can you receive a certificate of freedom in a way? But she received it, notwithstanding that, then the master attempted to say that they were in marriage, in a way, they were married. So somehow attempted to impose slavery over her, also through the control of children and through, marriage in a way. So transforming somehow marriage into a form of contemporary slavery. And it's good that actually the ECOWAS Court of Justice claimed that this is slavery. So we have also to be clear in respect of these issues, and how then local communities can change also certain practices. If, again, this is also coming from regional international organizations that are close actually to these areas of the world. And I stop here also to leave the floor to others. Thank you very much.
Okay, let me just quickly respond to the issue of the informal slave sector, let me put it that way, where customs traditions are used, like you said, the oath taking, or taking people to some fetishist shrines and giving them oath. For me, you cannot legislate against this. So what needs to be done is to use the same mechanism at the local level, using the traditional rulers, religious leaders, to also break the spell. Because, I mean, if you're an African like me, the same process that leads to the taking of oath, there are also processes that you can go through to undo, you know, whatever agreement, quote unquote, that has been entered through that process. So this is not legislation, this is not a state activity, but you will have to use, you know, the local chiefs, the babalaos, the alphas, you know, the local communities to attend to this. Thank you.
No, velocissimo per...
I will be very brief because I want to leave Soraya with enough time. I certainly will give my visiting card to Rose, and perhaps Rose, yes, if I could ask you please to pass it on to, or to give my addresses to anyone who wants, so mobile phone or email, because in the Italian Parliament and in the Senate in Italy, if I can raise any question about failure to respect human rights, trampling on democracy, slavery, I will gladly raise them at the Italian Parliament. But you need to, of course, get in touch with me. Now, second point, I'd like to tell you that at the beginning of 2019, I'm hoping with a number of friends and experts to start a blog on African questions. This will be in Italian and French, or maybe English. And so it will be, if you like, a space where we can discuss these questions and report on misbehavior, etc., just as we've been doing today. Thank you.
Je pense que...
It seems to me, in addition to what my comrades have said, I think there is a need for a determination to apply government laws, because there's a lack of will to enforce laws. If the law against slavery in my country were applied properly, I think the problem would be resolved, but there is no will to enforce the law. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I don't think we will have time to show the video. I will just give the floor to my colleague. I've finished with my job today, and thank you all. Once Soraya Post has spoken, we will go to 3G3, so forget what I said about 363. 3G3 for the film, and there will also be a sandwich lunch in that room.
Cecile, and thank you for giving me the honor to close this session. And I must also say, I am also very proud of my group, the Social Democrat, who initiated this Roma Week for the second time, I believe. It gives a strong message to the rest of the world that we are taking solidarity, our ID, political ID, which is built on and based on solidarity and equality, that we are all equal in rights and dignity. So I'm very proud. I am not a social democrat. I have been grown up in the social democrat government. I belong to a feministic political party, feministic initiative. But as soon as I was elected to represent my political party, I joined, of course, I joined the Social Democratic group, and I'm very happy for that. I totally agree with the lady from Mauritania when she said that it is linked to racism and capitalism and the force of dehumanization. So you don't need to identify yourself with your neighbor if you exploit your neighbor. I think this is, and this is not only a problem for continents outside the European Union. We have the same problem also in the European Union. I just wanted to give an example of my people. I belong to the Roma ethnicity, and a lot of them are used as slaves still today. They closed slavery in Romania 1865. The reality, the end of the slavery, when they stopped selling them as cattle on the market, was more closely like 1890. So, but the slavery got a more sophisticated form by not employing, discrimination, anti-gypsies, and to keep them in poverty. So the history of Europe is also very dark, and at its own continent, not to talk about other continent, has been used by European for centuries. Anyhow, it is a horrific reality for millions of people across the world. It is unbelievable that so many years after the abolition of slavery, modern slavery continues to affect more than 40 million people, and it has different forms. Taking another human being's freedom of choice is a fundamental violation of human dignity. We also know that the victims of modern slavery are most often those who are already in vulnerable situations due to their gender, their age, ethnicity, migration status, or coming from a conflict zone, or due to their poverty. According to the International Organization for Migration, women and girls account for 71% of the total number of modern slavery victims, and 1 in 4 victims of modern slavery are children. This is an intersectional issue which needs an intersectional approach. It is a feminist issue as well. Earlier this year, I worked on a report on child, early and forced marriage, and how to step up the EU's action on combating this fundamental violation on human rights. 12 million girls marry before the age of 18, almost 1 every second. Women are forced into prostitution and are victims of trafficking across the world at alarming rates, even when laws do exist to prevent it happening. They are not enforced, and authorities look away, which shows us that it is not only a matter of rule of law, it is also a matter of democracy, to strengthen the democracy. Rule of law has to be linked with democracy to be effective. And of course, the respect for human rights. It is very important to keep this issue high on the political agenda, and why it is important for human rights-based political parties, like the SND and my Feministic Initiative, that they are in government or at position where decisions are taken. We also see that the amounts of money that companies can make from exploitation of workers through modern slavery is huge. Each year, forced labor in sectors like domestic work, agriculture, construction, manufacturing, and entertainment generates $115 billion in illegal profits. The controls that are in place currently are simply not enough to combat this abuse of power. We need to push for stricter controls when it comes to business and human rights. We need transparency in supply chains, and we need it now. As we know, there is some movement from some governments across the world to introduce legislation to combat modern slavery. We can be glad at this move in the right direction. However, it is not enough. We need stronger laws and the political will to enforce them. It is a disgrace that in 2018 we live in a world when modern slavery exists and the use of other neighbors. And for me as a parliamentarian, I stand, of course, together with you all in this fight. That's why I have been a human rights activist for 40 years. I belong to a group who is dehumanized. Children's organs are sold, used as farmers in agriculture. Like today, I'll just give one example in Hungary. Farmers are using Roma people for free, and they are not having any salary at all. They are doing the work, but they have one meal a day, and they sleep among the cattle. So there is no costs. And this is the reality here in Europe. So I work on human rights in the committees in this parliament, and I will continue to do so because I feel responsibility, I feel solidarity, and I am proud to be human. And I would like all of us to be that. Thank you.
Grazie a tutti e a
Thank you all very much. And as I said earlier, 3G3, the room next door, is where we will be waiting for you. I would like to thank all our speakers. It really was a very interesting debate, and it's a priority issue for our group, the S&D. Thank you, and carry on the good work.